Karl Marx once called religion or belief in God, belief in the supernatural, the opiate of the masses. Now, what did he mean by this? What he meant is that human beings tend to want to avoid the challenges and contradictions of life. They don't like the idea of taking up the revolutionary cause. All of that takes a lot of effort. So we try to comfort ourselves with an illusory idea that, hey, there's no justice in this world, but that's okay because we'll get it in the next world. So it's a postponement of, you may say, social justice from this world to the next. Now, this idea from Marx is not original with him. In fact, he lifted it almost wholesale, almost verbatim, from the German philosopher named Feuerbach, Ludwig von Feuerbach. And Feuerbach's idea was that God doesn't actually create man, man creates God. So what man does is man takes all the good things in life that man actually wants and projects them onto God. So God is now identified as the God of wisdom and the God of goodness and beauty and justice, and all the bad things man keeps for himself. So in a sense, Feuerbach saw the belief in God as a form of self-hate, of man actually turning against himself, giving to God, this, in a sense, imaginary God, all these human virtues, and keeping for man himself all the human evils and vices. And Marx then borrows from Feuerbach and comes up with his critique. So we're seeing here how in the 19th century, we begin to see the emergence of a real secular and in some degree atheist attack on religion. And it's an intellectual attack which tries to explain away religious belief, but it's also a moral attack. It blames religion for the crimes of history. Look at the Inquisition, the Crusades, the religious wars, the Salem witch trials. And the idea is that a kind of a religion-drenched society is very unhealthy and very dangerous. And this applies really in some ways, I guess, to all religions, but specifically to the Abrahamic religions, religions like Islam and Christianity. You could argue that maybe Hinduism and Buddhism are kind of in a different, they haven't had religious wars in the same way. And so this is a critique that has gathered force and is, of course, very familiar to most of us. Probably the most important of all the atheist thinkers is the philosopher named Friedrich Nietzsche, who I'll be talking about a fair amount as our little apologetics course churns on. And Nietzsche was a very different character than, say, Darwin. Darwin was a kind of a dull fellow, a guy who said, basically, I've got this alternative explanation, it's called evolution, and human beings, after all, are kind of continuous with the animals. We're not fundamentally different from the animals, and in fact, that's how we got here. And Nietzsche, who in a sense embraced Darwinism, he didn't seem to have any fundamental critique of evolution. He didn't really like it, and he didn't really like Darwin. And in part, he didn't like Darwin because he says that Darwin is this kind of dull Englishman. And Nietzsche's own critique was very different. Nietzsche's view was ultimately that Christianity and belief in God are a kind of, they reflect hostility to life itself. They convince people to deprive themselves of what life has to offer. And so you think, for example, about the monks and priests through all the centuries who are like, listen, I'm not going to eat too much food because it's going to make me a glutton, and I'm going to abstain from sex. I'm going to make a vow of celibacy. So in other words, what you have is this sort of ascetic impulse in Christianity. Now, that's not present in all branches of Christianity, but nevertheless, it was present in the Catholic and Lutheran branches that Nietzsche was familiar with. So he goes, this Christianity is a denial of life. And essentially what Nietzsche championed is the opposite, a kind of, he says, we sort of have to go for life. We've got to embrace danger. We've got to pursue what life has to offer. And he didn't just mean the sort of pleasurable life, because you can imagine kind of an Epicurean lifestyle where you essentially sit around and, go to buffets every day and live a very comfortable, secure. But for Nietzsche, no. He said his philosophy was a philosophy of, he called it ice and tall mountains. And what he meant by this is that you got to take a lot of risk. In a sense, he almost thought that you could rise above humanity. You could create, human beings could, a better kind of human being. Not better in the sense of more virtuous, but stronger, more daring, more creative, more adventurous. These are the kind of terms that Nietzsche embraced. And of course, Nietzsche is the author of the famous phrase, whose meaning we will dissect later, the death of God. It actually doesn't mean what you think. It's not Nietzsche saying basically, hey, listen, I'm here to declare that God doesn't exist. First of all, that would be unoriginal. There are many people who said that before Nietzsche, and you'd hardly be famous for saying something so banal that it would amount to nothing more than a kind of negation of God. The death of God is actually a different kind of idea, which we'll get to later. So what's emerging out of this is that we have a critique of God and Christianity that says that if you want to live the truly intellectual life, you don't need God. You don't need this God of the gaps. Embrace science. And if you want to live this truly moral life, embrace your humanity, and enjoy the freedom that you get without God, without a God looking over your shoulder, exercising moral oversight, handing you commandments. It's not to say that you don't have morality, but your morality comes from you. It's man-made. It is societally constructed. So this is the critique of religion, of God, of Christianity that I want to lay out before turning around and beginning to systematically deconstruct it, examine all the different aspects of it, and I think in the end attempt to, well, kind of blow it out of the water.